Hey there humans, Bob here, welcome to another Marvel Avengers video. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you my Hawkeye Prime build. Most builds out there focus on a single thing, but these Prime builds are made for you to be able to tackle pretty much anything that the game throws at you. This Hawkeye is built to clear rooms, destroy bosses, heal allies, and never be without heroics. Don't forget to like and subscribe as we roll that intro. So, before we get into it, let's go over the sections that we're going to cover in this video. Number 1, stats, just how I've built my hero and why I focused on these stats. Number 2, skills, what skills I've selected and why. 3, champion points, what my focus around endgame leveling is. 4, gear, what perks I'm focusing on and why, and also where to farm this gear. And number 5, showcase, how this build works in combat. Right, let's start with which stats I focus on. My Hawkeye is like the majority of my builds in that he is focused on ranged and heroic attacks. This build heavily focuses on heroic regen, and I've perfected it to the point where I can have multiple Hunter's arrows up at once. So, my choice stats for this build are firstly Valor. Valor governs not only heroic effectiveness, which helps my damage output when using Clint's heroics, but it also dictates the amount of critical damage that you can output, which is key to this build. Secondly, as mentioned before, I run a ranged Hawkeye, so precision is a priority for me. Even if this build benefits more from Valor, it's still important to stack into this stat. Finally, I tend to make sure I have at least some resilience and resolve. In this build, I've managed to net a decent amount of both, although it's not exactly intentional. It's more a factor of the pieces that I want in the build are either stat locked or have just rolled with defensive focused stats. Don't worry though, this build still packs a hell of a punch. Let's move on to skills now. Obviously I have all of Hawkeye's base skills unlocked, but let's go into the specifics, starting with the specialty tree. Under support heroic ability, I use critical care. Since this build focuses on dealing critical hits to proc buffs, having Hawkeye support increase crit chance and crit and weak point damage by 20% is an easy choice indeed. Next, under support, I use intrinsic gifts, which gives you a 60% chance to cause enemies to drop intrinsic orbs. Now you may be wondering why I've gone for intrinsic instead of heroic here, since this is a heroic build. But don't worry, that'll make sense when we get to gear. Now on to assault heroic specializations. Here, I've opted for Fire Devil. The key reason that I've gone for that here is simply because it's the only positively charged status that is available on Nightstorm arrows, which means when enemies have a full stack of, let's say, shock from like your Hunter arrows, you can do an insane amount of battery damage. Secondly, I use the Falling Sky skill. This increases the duration of the Nightstorm arrows effect, which allows you to cause more damage to opponents caught in the damage radius. If you're struggling to hit enemies accurately though, try using Fatal Domain, which increases the AoE. Finally, onto ultimate specializations. For the first, I use Twin Talons, which as well as firing 2 Hunter arrows, it also applies shock to any enemies that it hits, priming them for battery damage from the Nightstorm arrows that we mentioned earlier. And finally, as the last specialization, I use Bird in the Hand. This skill gives you a 25% chance to generate a heroic orb when an enemy is defeated by the Hunter's arrow, which means as you use your ultimate, you're also providing a way to regenerate it. Now, let's look at the mastery skill tree. First off, melee. In the first slot, I use Inescapable Blast. It's not really important to this build, but being able to pull enemies into one area with the Implosion arrow can help you to hit more enemies with your Nightstorm arrows if done right. This skill allows you to do that with big enemies too. Onto the second specialization now, and this is super easy. Since Split Shot Arrow is the centerpiece attack for this build, the 15% increased damage here is just what the doctor ordered. The third skill selection I use is Intrinsic Burst. Again, this seems strange considering this is a heroic regen build, as it gives you intrinsic orbs on takedowns, not heroic. But as mentioned before, this will all make sense later. Onto the range section of masteries now, and I've gone for Heavy Draw, which increases the damage of razor arrows by 10% and the impact from low to medium, just making them hit that little bit harder. For the second range mastery, I've gone for Tripwire Spread. The only reason I've gone for this is because all of them are highly situational, but this one is a little less so. The third skill choice here isn't very important, as 2 of the choices are situational and the other is for cluster arrows, which I almost never use. I went for Superpowered Pulse though, mainly because it seems like a fun skill. Onto the intrinsic ability masteries now, and the first one I use is Salt in the Wound. This is great if you have any perks that rely on weak points. A bit situational, but cool nonetheless. For the second mastery here, I use Room for Error. The reason I use this is simple. Hawkeye's intrinsic build-up sucks. If you take any damage when trying to build your overcharge meter, it pretty much resets it, and since this build relies on you being overcharged, that can cause some problems. This skill helps to lessen that blow. The final mastery in this section that I use is Volatile Rocket. Not because it's particularly good, just because the name sounds cool, and any skill here is kind of pointless because I literally never parry. Moving on to the final mastery tree now, Intrinsic Overcharge, and honestly, for each of these you're going to have to do some playing around, as these skill selections are going to be very focused on your playstyle, since each of them allow you to do a combination of either increased damage, reduced intrinsic depletion, or heroic regen. For my selection though, whilst overcharged, I've gone with Multi-Talented to increase rain damage, Heroic Resolve to drop more heroic orbs, and Critical Might for more crit attack damage. Right, now we've gone over skill choices, let's talk about champion skill focuses. I tend to focus on similar skills with all heroes with a little variance, but when the champion system launched, we didn't really know what was the best thing to focus on. But one thing we noticed is that the whole combat boost section basically adds nothing to your character. So with that in mind, here's my priority order for champion points. Quick note though, I wouldn't suggest going all the way to the 5th unlocks until you've spread your points across the other skills, as 16 champion points aren't that easy to come across outside of XP boost events. By the way, if you want to see the quickest way to level your champion points, don't forget to check out my fast XP leveling video, links in the description down below. Right. Now onto the list. Number 1, critical damage. This is going to give you a 5% boost on each unlock that increases crit damage, which this build heavily focuses on, so a major priority on this. Number 2, heroic recharge. With a 2.5% boost to recharge per unlock, this will help you to regain your heroics incredibly quickly in general, but with this build, it'll help you to have almost infinite heroics. Number 3, critical chance. Crit damage is pointless without a chance to actually do a critical hit. Each step in this tree will give you a flat 1% boost to your crit chance, which is actually really good. Number 4, perk chance. Basically, the more you unlock this tree, the more chance you have of proccing stuff like damage buff, payloads, and more, which is pretty much helpful in every build. Number 4, stun and status damage. You'll gain an additional 2% on both of these damage types, which will help when dealing battery damage, but also stun, which really helps during certain raid phases. Number 5, fortification boost. As I focus on resilience a lot with this build, or any other build, to lower any incoming damage, this is my main defensive focus, as all unlocks will provide a flat 5% additional armor. After these, feel free to put points wherever you like, but make sure you leave the combat ones until last, as they have the least utility across the board. Now, let's take a look at gear. One thing to bear in mind is that some of the gear featured here is discordant gear, and the only places that you can grab that gear is in the raid, the elite raid, or the corrupted vibranium event. That said, you will be able to use the basis of the build to achieve some of the same effects, even if you haven't done the raid or had access to the event yet. So, starting with melee, this piece is a great stat roll for this build. With Valor, Precision, and Resilience, this is exactly what I need. And the first perk, Receiving Amplification Breaker, means anytime I receive the Sonic Conduit buff, I get a boost of 15% to all status damage, which is fantastic as Hawkeye can deal such a huge array of status damage. Another reason why perk 1 is good is because of perk 2, and that's because the light combo and split shot arrows apply vibranium. Since power attacks are my key attack that also apply a hefty amount of status build up, these two perks are perfect together, since later in the build I have a way of self-procking the Sonic Conduit buff with vibranium. The third perk here is also super helpful. By extending the recovery arrow duration by 10 seconds, I can keep myself and my teammates alive for longer. If you want to grab this piece, you'll have to head into the elite raid to get it to drop. Onto my ranged piece now, and I'd honestly 100% understand if you question why this is in my build. It's a purple rarity, so the stats are low, and to add to that, the stats are also terrible. I generally prefer something with Precision and Valor in there, and whilst the second perk deals sonic damage, which allows for instant battery, since the Bag of Tricks attack uses pulsar arrows, which is honestly spectacular in itself, and the third perk is generally okay to help heal you, the only real reason I'm using this piece is for the first perk, Targeted Spark. Targeted Spark is a god tier perk for heroic focus builds. It is one of the most reliable ways to regen heroics while simultaneously be delivering damage. This piece that I have is just horrible compared to the pieces that you can get out there, but fear not. As well as Targeted Spark being able to drop almost anywhere, you can also get it to drop on Tachyon gear. Whilst it's going to take a lot of luck, you could potentially get a piece to drop with Targeted Spark and Targeted Tachyon Surge, which is another incredibly OP perk from either beating the odds or the Tachyon Anomaly event. Onto my defensive piece now, this is the Operative's Armor, which is an Apex gear set piece that drops from the priority mission, so you'll actually have a chance to grab it once a day. This piece is stat locked to Resolve, Intensity, and Resilience, so not great for damage output, but the perks make it a best in slot. Starting with perk 1, the minus 10% damage reduction whilst overcharged is particularly useful this build because you'll be trying to stay in that state almost permanently whilst in combat. Perk 2 is God tier. Auto Shield provides you with a 15% chance to activate a nanite shield that negates literally any attack. Perk 3 though is what makes this whole piece worth the lackluster stats. Split Shot Multiplier allows you to basically double the amount of projectiles when using the Bag of Tricks power attack combo. This is by far one of the most powerful combos in the game, and this perk is what gets it there. For those of you really annoyed with the lack of damage focused stats, there is a version that drops in the raid with Precision, Valor and Resilience instead, but you will need to lose the previous 2 perks. Personally, I don't mind that, but I haven't rolled that piece yet, so until I do, this is the one I'm going for. Onto the heroic slot now, and Operative's Kit is another Apex gear set piece that drops from the priority mission, so you'll also have a shot of grabbing this once a day too. Luckily, this piece can drop with Precision, Valor and Resolve though. The first perk, Locked On Breaker, is great as it increases all damage and impact by a healthy 20% when overcharged. The second increases the amount of health recovered as well as the duration of your support heroic by another 10 seconds, further increasing your survivability. But the third perk here is the real deal. Locked On Resonance holds this build together. The 3% increased willpower and heroic energy regen is actually more like 300%. So now you'll understand why we wanted all those intrinsic orbs in the skill selection. Since Hawkeye sucks at overcharging himself, it can be a bit tricky if you're not used to playing as Clint. But if you practice, it shouldn't be an issue to get this perk to fire up. And when you do, it's Heroic Spam City. Onto artifacts now, and this is pretty straightforward. Like many of my other builds, I've targeted this Valor ISO for a couple of reasons. Number 1 being the stat roll. Since it's a perfect triple 64, this yellow ISO 8 is pretty much everything I need. But as well as this, I got it to roll with increased regen speed of Ultimate Heroics. I nabbed this from Sydney Gaffer Levine in the Shield Substation 0, so just make sure to check his shop out every day and you should be able to grab something similar easily enough. Onto the second minor artifact now, and I use this Nornstone of the Vanguard that rolled pretty nicely stat-wise. I'm going to call back to earlier in the video now though. Remember how I wanted to make sure that we had Vibranium as the main attack? This is why. With these 2 perks, I will not only regen heroic and intrinsic energy when defeating enemies with Vibranium applied, but I'll also regenerate intrinsic energy just for attacking them, which also helps to keep me in an overcharge state, which this build depends upon. If you're looking for this ISO though, I have some good news and some bad news. Since this is a Discordant artifact, you'll only be able to normally get it from the raid or the elite raid. The good news is though, if the Corrupted Vibranium event is on, you can get these artifacts just for completing Corrupted Vibranium threat sectors. Finally now, onto the major artifact, and whilst most people will suggest going for the Tactagon or the Nornstone of Lethal Will, I've gone for the Ring of Nibelung, which increases the amount of heroic energy gained from heroic orbs, and also gives you the ability to spawn your own orbs to help regen either your health, your intrinsic, or your heroics. Either way, it's incredibly useful to have when your build depends on keeping your meters up, as it basically speeds up your heroic regen even more. And since Hawkeye's ultimate heroic can make enemies drop orbs when they are defeated, you can just collect those orbs and you can basically instantly regen your heroics when overcharged, which again is just fed more by using your heroics. And there you go, that's it for gear. So, to summarize, in this build we have infinite heroic cycle, instant battery damage, near invincibility from your support heroic, huge damage output, insane orb generation, and even self-healing.
All from me? Aww.
There they are.
Gotta respect the classic. So good of you to come. A shame you won't be around long.
Glad we're on the same page about your chances.
Using his credentials to enter the AIM database. And we have located the clone on the top floor. Watch out. I think it might be expecting you.
Don't waste time running! Get catch up!
You never learn, Masters.
Watch him fall! Whoa! That was too easy.
Also, if you're looking for more Prime builds or just looking to level up your champion level super fast, check out these videos on the channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, stay safe, stay awesome, and I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.